The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's emergency room flickered as Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the hallway, her scrub still damp with someone else's blood, staring at the little girl who shouldn't have been alive. Emma Reyes was 7 years old, her tiny body covered in wires and tubes, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical precision of a ventilator. 22 doctors had reviewed her case. 22 brilliant minds had come to the same conclusion. There was nothing more they could do. But standing in the corner of that sterile room, holding his daughter's hand with a grip that defied every medical opinion, was Marcus Reyes, a single father who drove a city bus for a living and was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a prescription pad. Marcus Reyes had always believed that being a good father meant showing up. Every morning at 5, he'd wake Emma with her favorite song, make her breakfast, always with exactly 3 blueberries on top of her oatmeal because that was their tradition, and walk her to the bus stop before starting his own route across the city. His hands were calloused from years of gripping a steering wheel, his back perpetually sore from the driver's seat. But when Emma wrapped her small arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Daddy," before school, every ache disappeared. That Tuesday morning in late October started like any other, except Emma didn't want breakfast. She'd been tired lately, Marcus had noticed, but he'd chalked it up to school, to growing, to being 7 years old and having the energy of a hummingbird that occasionally needed to recharge. But when she collapsed at the bus stop, her tiny body going limp in his arms, Marcus felt his entire world tilt on its axis. The ER at St. Mary's was chaos incarnate. Nurses rushing between curtained rooms, machines beeping in frantic rhythms, the smell of antiseptic and fear hanging heavy in the air. Emma was whisked away, and Marcus was left standing in a hallway, his daughter's small backpack still clutched in his hands. The 3 blueberries he'd packed for her lunch now seeming like artifacts from another lifetime. Hours blurred together. Doctors came and went, their faces growing more serious with each test result. Each scan, each whispered consultation in the hallway that Marcus could see but not hear. Dr. Sarah Chen was the one who finally sat down with him in a small, windowless room that Marcus would later realize was where they delivered the worst news. She was young, maybe 35, with kind eyes that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion behind them. She laid out the facts with the gentle precision of someone who'd had to break hearts before. Emma had a rare form of pediatric brain tumor, one that had somehow grown undetected until it was wrapped around critical blood vessels and neural pathways like ivy strangling a tree. It was inoperable, at least that's what the scan suggested. "We've consulted with the best neurosurgeons in the state," Dr. Chen said, her hands folded on the table between them. "We've sent her scans to specialists in Boston, Chicago, even Johns Hopkins. 22 of the most brilliant surgical minds in the country have reviewed Emma's case." She paused, and in that pause, Marcus felt the floor drop away beneath him. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reyes. They all came to the same conclusion. The tumor's location makes surgery impossible. Even attempting it would likely cause catastrophic damage to her brain function. The risks far outweigh any potential benefit." Marcus heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away, as if Dr. Chen were speaking to him from the bottom of a well. "So, what do we do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "There has to be something. Radiation? Chemotherapy? Something?" Dr. Chen's expression softened even further, which somehow made everything worse. "We can try aggressive chemotherapy and radiation, but given the tumor's type and location, we're talking about extending her time, not curing her. We're talking months, Mr. Reyes. Maybe 6 to 8 if we're very lucky, and she responds well to treatment. I'm so sorry." Months. 6 to 8 months. The words echoed in Marcus's head as he walked back to Emma's room in the ICU. Through the window he could see his daughter, his entire world, lying in that bed, looking so small beneath the white sheets, her dark hair splayed across the pillow, her chest rising and falling with the help of machines. She'd lost consciousness on the way to the hospital and hadn't woken up since. The tumor was pressing against her brainstem, they'd explained. It was why she'd collapsed. It was why she might never wake up again. Marcus stepped into the room and pulled a chair close to her bed. He took her hand, so small, so fragile, and held it between both of his. I'm here, baby girl, he whispered. Daddy's here, and I'm not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I'm not going anywhere. The machines beeped their monotonous rhythm. The ventilator hissed and sighed. And in the corner of the room, Marcus Reyes, a man who'd survived his wife walking out on them when Emma was 2, who'd worked double shifts to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, who'd learned to braid hair from YouTube videos and had attended every single school play and parent-teacher conference, made a decision. He didn't care what 22 doctors said. He didn't care about statistics or medical impossibilities or the cautious, measured language of people who'd seen too much death. He was going to save his daughter. Somehow, some way, he was going to find an answer that everyone else had missed. The hospital library closed at 8 p.m., but Marcus had learned that if you were quiet and looked like you belonged, no one questioned why you were still there at midnight. He'd called in sick to work, the first time in 7 years, and set up camp in the corner with Emma's medical files, a laptop he'd borrowed from a neighbor, and a determination that bordered on obsession. If 22 doctors had looked at his daughter's case, then he would look at it as the 23rd opinion. He didn't have medical training, he'd barely graduated high school, but he had something those doctors didn't have. He had Emma's entire life as his motivation. Dr. Chen found him there on the 3rd night, surrounded by printed research papers and medical journals, his eyes red from a lack of sleep and the strain of reading words he had to look up every other sentence. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him, before finally speaking. Mr. Reyes, it's almost 2 in the morning. Marcus looked up, startled. He'd lost track of time, lost in an article about experimental surgical techniques in Japan. I'm sorry, I know I should probably... What are you reading? Dr. Chen interrupted, stepping closer. Marcus held up the paper, suddenly self-conscious. It's about a doctor in Tokyo. He's been using this technique called awake craniotomy, combined with real-time neural mapping for tumors that were previously considered inoperable. I know I probably don't understand half of what I'm reading, but... He stopped, his voice cracking. I have to try, Dr. Chen. I have to find something. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, quietly, she asked, May I see what you found? Over the next hour, Marcus walked her through everything he'd discovered. He'd found case studies from around the world, rare experimental procedures that existed on the cutting edge of neurosurgery. He'd found a surgeon in Germany who'd successfully operated on a similar tumor, using a combination of laser ablation and microscopic surgical tools. He'd found a researcher in Sweden developing a technique using focused ultrasound to break down tumor tissue without opening the skull. He'd even tracked down a clinical trial in California testing a new form of immunotherapy specifically for pediatric brain tumors. I know these are long shots, Marcus said, his voice hoarse from talking. I know most of these probably won't work for Emma. But all those doctors, they looked at her scans and saw an impossible case. I'm looking at the same scans and seeing my daughter. And I need someone to see what I see. To see that she's worth the risk. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long time, studying the papers spread across the table. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Mr. Reyes, I have to be honest with you. What you're suggesting, these experimental procedures, reaching out to surgeons halfway around the world, the chances of finding someone willing to take on Emma's case are incredibly slim. And even if we do, there's no guarantee... I know, Marcus interrupted, but slim is better than none. And no guarantee is better than a guaranteed goodbye. Something shifted in Dr. Chen's expression. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the memory of why she'd become a doctor in the first place, before the endless bureaucracy and liability concerns and the weight of impossible cases had worn down her idealism. Maybe it was simply the sight of a father who loved his daughter so much that he was willing to learn neurosurgery from library books at 2 in the morning. Whatever it was, she nodded. Okay, she said. I'll help you. We'll make calls. We'll send Emma's scans to every specialist you found. We'll explore every option, no matter how experimental or unconventional. She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes. But you need to prepare yourself for more rejection, Mr. Reyes. These surgeons, they have reputations to protect. They have success rates to maintain. Agreeing to operate on a case like Emma's, where the odds are so heavily stacked against success, it's a risk many won't be willing to take. Then we find the one who will, Marcus said simply. Over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Chen became more than Emma's doctor. She became Marcus's partner in an exhaustive campaign to find a medical miracle. She made calls during her lunch breaks, sent emails at midnight, used every professional connection she'd built over her career. They reached out to the surgeon in Germany, who politely declined after reviewing the scans. The tumor was too advanced, he said, even for his techniques. The researcher in Sweden explained that focused ultrasound only worked on certain types of tumors, and Emma's wasn't one of them. The California clinical trial had a wait list 2 years long. Rejection after rejection piled up. Marcus stopped counting after the 10th no. He divided his time between Emma's bedside, where she remained unconscious but stable, and his research in the library. Other parents in the ICU waiting room started to recognize him. This tall man with shadows under his eyes, who always had a notebook and a laptop, who paced the halls at 3 a.m. memorizing medical terminology he'd never heard before 2 weeks ago. It was Dr. Chen who found Dr. James Mitchell. He wasn't on any of Marcus's lists. He wasn't famous or particularly well published. He was a pediatric neurosurgeon at a mid-sized hospital in Oregon who'd spent the last decade developing something he called modular microsurgery, a technique that involved removing tumors in tiny sections over multiple surgeries, mapping the brain's responses after each procedure to minimize damage. It was painstaking, time-consuming, and most surgeons considered it too radical, too risky. Dr. Mitchell had performed it successfully on 3 patients. All 3 had been given 0 chance of survival by other doctors. When Dr. Chen showed Dr. Mitchell's work to Marcus, his hands trembled as he held the papers. "Will he even look at Emma's case?" Marcus asked, afraid to hope. "I already sent him the scans," Dr. Chen admitted. "He called me an hour ago. He wants to video conference with us tomorrow morning." The conference call happened in a small office off the ICU with Marcus, Dr. Chen, and Dr. Mitchell's face on a laptop screen. He was older than Marcus expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and glasses that he kept pushing up his nose as he studied something off-screen. "I've reviewed Emma's scans extensively," Dr. Mitchell said without preamble. "Your daughter's tumor is one of the most challenging cases I've ever seen. The way it's intertwined with her brainstem and cerebral cortex, it's remarkable in the worst possible way." Marcus's heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. Another no, but Dr. Mitchell continued. "That said, I believe my technique could work. It won't be easy. We're talking about a minimum of 6 separate surgeries over several months, each one requiring Emma to be awake for portions of it, so we can monitor her neural responses. The recovery between each surgery will be difficult. There will be setbacks. And I need to be very clear with you, Mr. Reyes. The success rate for cases like this is about 30%. There's a very real possibility that Emma could die on my operating table, or survive but with significant cognitive or physical disabilities." "What's her chance if we don't do the surgery?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. 0, Dr. Mitchell said bluntly. "Without intervention, the tumor will continue to grow. She'll never wake up. You'll have a few weeks to say goodbye." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Then 30% is better than 0. When can we start?" The look Dr. Mitchell gave him through the screen was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Respect, sadness, and a fierce determination that matched his own. "I'll need to make arrangements with St. Mary's to come to you. Emma can't be moved safely in her current condition. Give me 48 hours to coordinate with my team. Mr. Reyes?" Dr. Mitchell paused. "Your daughter is lucky to have you fighting for her." Marcus's vision blurred with tears. "I'm the lucky one," he whispered. "She's my whole world." 2 days later, Dr. James Mitchell arrived at St. Mary's Hospital with his surgical team. The first operation was scheduled for the following morning. That night, Marcus sat beside Emma's bed, holding her hand and talking to her the way he had every night since she'd fallen unconscious. He told her about the plan, about Dr. Mitchell, about how brave she was going to have to be. He told her about all the things they'd do when she was better. Trips to the beach, learning to ride a bike, maybe getting that puppy she'd been begging for. He told her that no matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, he would be there. "You're going to wake up, baby girl," he whispered, his forehead pressed against her small hand. "You're going to wake up, and we're going to have all those days I promised you. All those mornings with 3 blueberries on your oatmeal. All those bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes and everything. You hear me? This isn't the end of our story. This is just the hard part in the middle, the part where we have to be brave. But we're going to make it through. I promise you, Emma, I promise." The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed. And somewhere deep inside, in the mysterious place where consciousness dwells, even when the body is still, maybe Emma heard him. Maybe she held on a little tighter. Maybe she decided that if her father wasn't giving up, then neither would she. The first surgery began at 6 a.m. It lasted 14 hours. Marcus wore a path in the waiting room floor, his phone clutched in his hand, watching the updates on the surgery board. Procedure in progress. Dr. Chen sat with him when she could, bringing him coffee he didn't drink, and sandwiches he couldn't eat. Other families came and went. The sun tracked across the sky. And Marcus prayed to every god he could think of, made every bargain a desperate father could make. When Dr. Mitchell finally emerged from the surgical suite, still in his scrubs, Marcus couldn't read his expression. The surgeon pulled off his cap and sat down heavily in the chair beside Marcus. For a terrible moment, he said nothing. "She's alive," Dr. Mitchell said finally. "We removed about 15% of the tumor. Her neural responses during the procedure were stronger than I expected. She's got fight in her, Mr. Reyes, just like her father." Marcus broke down. Years of holding it together, of being strong, of refusing to acknowledge the fear that had been eating him alive. It all came pouring out in that waiting room. Dr. Chen put a hand on his shoulder. Dr. Mitchell waited patiently until Marcus could breathe again. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Mitchell warned. "We have a long road ahead. But she made it through the first surgery. That's something 22 other doctors said couldn't happen." 22 doctors said she was impossible, Marcus said, wiping his eyes. "But they didn't know, Emma. They didn't know that impossible is just a word. And words don't mean anything when you're fighting for someone you love." Over the next 4 months, Emma underwent 5 more surgeries. Between each one, she slowly, miraculously began to wake up. First, it was just her fingers twitching in response to Marcus's voice. Then her eyes fluttering open for a few seconds before closing again. Then words, broken and confused at first, but words nonetheless. Marcus was there for every moment, talking to her, reading to her, playing her favorite songs. Dr. Chen checked on them daily, even when it wasn't her shift. Dr. Mitchell flew back for each surgery, his modular approach slowly, meticulously, removing the tumor piece by piece while preserving the delicate architecture of Emma's brain. There were setbacks. After the 3rd surgery, Emma lost movement in her right arm for 2 weeks. After the 4th, she forgot how to speak for several days, the words locked somewhere behind the trauma of surgery. Each time, Marcus held her through the panic and the tears, whispering the same thing. "We're going to make it through, you and me, always." And each time, Emma came back a little stronger. The final surgery happened on a Tuesday morning in February, almost 4 months after Marcus had first sat in that windowless room and heard the word impossible. Dr. Mitchell removed the last fragments of the tumor, the pieces that had been too risky to touch until Emma had healed enough to withstand the final procedure. When he emerged this time, he was smiling. "It's gone," he said simply. "Every last trace. We'll need to monitor her closely, do regular scans, but Mr. Reyes, your daughter is going to live. She's going to live. And if she keeps progressing the way she has been, she's going to thrive." Emma came home 3 weeks later. Marcus carried her across the threshold of their small apartment, and she looked around with eyes that were bright and clear and alive. Her hair was growing back in patches where they'd shaved it for surgery. She'd lost weight and still needed physical therapy to rebuild her strength. But she was home. She was alive. That first morning, Marcus made breakfast the way he always had. Oatmeal with exactly 3 blueberries on top. Emma sat at their small kitchen table, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the spoon and looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. "I heard you, Daddy," she said softly. "When I was sleeping. I heard you talking to me. You told me not to give up, not to give." Marcus knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms, careful of her healing incisions, and held her as gently as he'd hold the entire world. "I'll never give up on you, baby girl. Never." 6 months later, Dr. Chen stopped by to check on Emma during a follow-up appointment. Emma ran down the hospital hallway, actually ran, and threw her arms around the doctor who'd helped save her life. Dr. Chen hugged her back, tears streaming down her face, and looked over Emma's head at Marcus. "You did this," she said. "You refused to accept the impossible, and you saved your daughter's life." But Marcus shook his head. "We all did this. You, Dr. Mitchell, Emma herself. Sometimes the impossible just needs someone who's too stubborn, or too in love to believe it." Emma Reyes made a full recovery. The tumor never came back. She grew up to become a neuroscientist, inspired by the doctors who'd saved her life, and the father who'd refused to let her go. Dr. Chen and Dr. Mitchell co-authored a paper on Emma's case that changed how the medical community approached so-called inoperable pediatric brain tumors. And Marcus Reyes went back to driving his city bus, his hands calloused and his back sore, but every morning still starting with the same routine. Oatmeal with exactly 3 blueberries on top, because some traditions are worth keeping forever. Because in the end, it wasn't medical miracles or experimental procedures that saved Emma's life. It was love. It was a father who looked at the word impossible and saw only, "I'm possible." It was the reminder that sometimes the strongest medicine doesn't come from a prescription. It comes from refusing to give up on the people who matter most. 22 doctors said no. But it only took one father saying yes, and one surgeon brave enough to believe in that yes, to turn the impossible into Emma's second chance at life. And that, more than any medical technique or surgical innovation, was the real miracle.